In this box, I have a pair of Terrascape Air Max 90s. I'm making my girlfriend Lola a two-way sole swap hybrid for Christmas, and right now it is December 14th. Because of the amount of time I have, I'm gonna have to go ahead and get these things separated. Without further ado, let's get the soles off of these bad boys. The first step in this project was separating the soles off of these Air Max 90s. To begin with, I removed the laces and the insoles and then applied a small amount of acetone along the seams of the uppers and the midsoles on the inside of the shoe. I then broke out my steam gun and my bone folder, and I utilized the steam from the steam gun right along the seam of the upper and the midsole to help to break down the glue. Utilizing my bone folder, I began to pry the midsole off of the upper and continued to apply heat from the steam gun to allow for the glue to break down further and make the separation process a bit easier. Well, that detachment process was a hell of a lot more challenging than I initially expected, but the results came out halfway decent. Next up, I gotta prep the surfaces to get them ready for a reglue, so let's break out the Dremel. After removing the soles from the Air Max 90s, it was time to remove all the old factory glue from the midsoles and the uppers. To do this, I broke out my Dremel. I utilized a grinding bit and light pressure to help to loosen up all of the old glue and let it flake off naturally. During this part of the process, you want to be careful not to utilize too much pressure because you can actually damage the components that you're working with, which can ruin the entire project. This is especially important on the uppers, which have a lot more delicate materials. After getting off as much of the glue and debris as I possibly could, I decided that I was going to cut off the plastic cages that were on this version of the Air Max 90 because they had become slightly damaged during the sole removal process and they just didn't really look good anymore. I brought out my razor blade, and being very careful not to damage the uppers, I cut off these plastic cages so I had a nice clean surface to work with. However, there was still some debris and glue left over from the factory glue job, so I did break out some acetone and cotton balls to help to remove any remaining debris and glue. I did try to be as careful as possible with the acetone and use as little as possible so I didn't cause any damage to the uppers. Unfortunately, I got an email from Goat saying that the pair of Air Max 97s that I had ordered did not come in. They essentially got lost during the sorting process. Luckily, as we were doing a little bit of outlet shopping, we ended up finding this pair of Adidas 4D Forward. Lola actually really liked them, so she said let's go ahead and swap these onto the uppers of the Air Max 90s. I gotta separate these soles from the uppers, so let's go ahead and get into that. I was a little bit bummed that I had to pull an audible after Goat lost the Air Max 97s that I had ordered, but luckily these Adidas 4D Forwards were pretty cheap at the Dick's Sporting Goods outlet. I utilized the same exact sole removal process as I did with the Air Max 90s, but because the uppers on the 4D Forwards are made out of a mesh material, I was able to be a bit more liberal with my use of acetone, and the uppers actually separate a lot more easily on the 4D Forwards than they do from the Air Max 90s. This made the process a lot quicker, and I was able to get a nice clean separation. Now that the soles and the uppers are separated from one another, it's time to prep the surfaces. Basically what I gotta do is utilize my Dremel tool to remove all the old excess glue. Preparation work on the components from the Adidas 4D Forward is very similar to that of the Air Max 90. I begin utilizing a grinding bit on my Dremel tool to help to clear off any old glue and debris from the midsoles. After clearing off the glue and the debris from the top of the midsoles, I try to make my way into the nooks and crannies to remove any sort of glue strings that might still be there that could cause any sort of disruption with my reglue. Trying to loosen up the glue from the uppers is also a little bit more challenging due to the mesh material that they're made out of. Because of the mesh, some of the factory glue will actually sink into the nooks and crannies, which makes it a little bit more challenging to remove. I begin by loosening it as best as I possibly can with my Dremel, and once I've hit all of the different sections that need to be hit with the Dremel tool, I'll break out the cotton balls and the acetone. Because the uppers are made out of mesh, I can be a little bit more liberal with my use of acetone, which makes it a little bit more convenient to remove all of the old glue and debris. But again, just because of the way that the glue sinks into the nooks and crannies of both the midsole and the uppers, it is a pretty challenging and time-consuming process. Now that I got these Adidas 4D Forward and Nike Air Max 90s completely separated and prepped, it's time to get them attached to one another, starting out by outlining where the uppers will fall onto the soles. I'll then be applying my cement, and then I'll be bonding my surfaces together. Once I have all my surfaces prepped, it's time to get ready to bond the uppers to the soles. I begin by aligning the uppers in the midsoles and utilizing a heat erasable pen so I know exactly where the uppers will be seated. After getting everything marked off appropriately, I begin by applying a light single layer of Barge Super Stick cement, starting with a big brush to get heavy amounts of glue onto the sole and the upper, and then spreading that glue using a smaller, more precision-based brush so I can get nice even coats throughout. After allowing the first layer to dry for about 15 minutes or so, I will then apply a secondary light layer to make sure that I have nice even coverage throughout. After letting the glue cure for 2 hours, I heat activate it, and I first bond the toe, followed immediately by bonding the heel. I find that doing this will help me to align everything appropriately and make sure that the uppers are centered on the midsoles. Once you do this, the medial and lateral sides typically fall right into place, and then you can just reheat section by section to make sure that everything is going to be sitting in place and in alignment. I follow this up by hitting the inside of the shoe so I can smooth out the footbed and make sure that it's a nice surface that you'll be standing on. I repeat the same exact process on the second pair of shoes too, making sure that I have everything lined up as appropriately as possible. Again, I start at the toe, moving immediately to the heel, and then I follow up by reheating section by section along both the lateral and medial side of the shoe. This definitely is the most easy way that I've found to glue in a sole swap hybrid project because it definitely allows everything to stay centered and well aligned. Once I have all of my surfaces glued together, it's time to get the kicks laced back up and do any sort of final work to clean up any sort of remaining debris or loose threads. After a longer than expected process, this sole swap hybrid between these Adidas 4D Forward and these Nike Air Max 90s is finally complete. So let's take a closer look. Looking first at the Adidas 4D Forward uppers on the Air Max 90 soles, you can see that the fit between the two was actually really nice. The colors between the soles and the uppers matched up nearly perfectly. Unfortunately, my glue lines are a little bit off as it was pretty challenging to actually figure out how the alignment would work out, but luckily everything is centered really nicely. I am slowly and steadily working on removing the excess glue lines. However, it's a pretty challenging process without damaging the uppers, and I would much rather keep the uppers in good shape with a little bit of extra glue over removing all of the glue and damaging the uppers in the process. At the end of the day, I'm really happy with the way that this specific pair turned out, and I definitely learned a lot during the process. Moving on to the Air Max 90 uppers on the 4D Forward soles, I was also able to achieve a really nice alignment with this pair. And luckily, the glue lines are a bit better. Unfortunately, the uppers did sustain a little bit of damage during the removal process, but unless you look incredibly closely, it's pretty difficult to tell. The color scheme also matches up quite nicely between the outsoles from the 4D Forward and the uppers from the Air Max 90s. these. The centering on this pair is also looking great. I'm really excited with the way that these components matched up. I probably could have changed the way that I glued down the toe and the heel to make things fit just a little bit better. But at the end of the day, I wanted to cover up all of the old glue line, and I think that I did a really good job of that. While there is just a little bit of excess glue on the medial aspect of the shoe, it's not something that I have to worry about removing, because unless you're looking at these things from a couple of inches away, you really can't tell. On both of these pairs, the bond is incredibly strong, and I can tell that these things are not going to separate at any time in the near future. Overall, I'm insanely excited with how these pairs turned out. Even though I ran into some issues obtaining the Air Max 97s that I had initially thought I was going to use on this project, we were able to find this pair of Adidas 4D forwards that really fit the bill and made for an awesome sole swap hybrid. I'm really curious to hear what you guys think of these hybrids though, so please let me know in the comments below. If you did enjoy watching this project happen, make sure that you drop a like and subscribe to the channel. Doing those things takes about 10 seconds, and it really helps it going a long way in supporting future endeavors. As per usual, thank you to everybody that stuck around into the cold, bitter end of this video. You guys already know, I'm Sailboat, and I'm out of here.